Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.
Well, last week, ifac, the farming, food and agribusiness professional services firm, released its annual food and agribusiness SME report. Unsurprisingly, recruitment and financial challenges, along with the need for increased use of artificial intelligence, were among some of the key findings in the report. David Leydon is the head of food and agribusiness with ifac, and he joins us now to talk us through the main insights from the report. David, in order to contextualise the findings of the report, remind us about the size of the food and agribusiness sectors in Ireland and the important contribution which they make to the domestic economy.
Good morning, Karl. Delighted to be on the show. Yeah, well, look, the Irish food and agribusiness sector, as anyone, especially in the southeast, knows, is really, really significant. €16 billion worth of Irish exports last year in food and drink. It's a significant sector, very significant employment, and employment in parts of the country where there mightn't be too many multinationals. So an important sector for this country.
So if we look at each of these sectors separately, how have they been performing over the past 12 months?
Okay, so if we look at the food and agribusiness sector to begin with, they have like 90% of the companies that we surveyed, and this is the SME sector. So this isn't Tirlán, this isn't Dawn Meat, this is the SME food companies that you see around the southeast, but also all over the country. 90% of them have maintained their increased turnover, but that's not all good news because really 75% of them have had an increase in their costs this year. And this is coming on the back of a number of years where there's been an increase in costs, right? So that's been challenging. So in terms of maintaining their margin, a small proportion grew their margin, but most companies, margin stayed broadly the same.
So in terms of raw material costs, have they levelled out at this stage?
They're beginning to level out. That would be from the conversations we're having today. There is some levelling out. But the last 2 years, like 84% of our companies that we surveyed last year had an input cost increase. 75%, so a bit less, had an input cost increase this year. But so beginning to level out, but not clear yet. And look at 2023, our next report will tell a tale, but they haven't fully leveled out at this stage.
And I suppose most of those companies have had to pass on those additional raw material costs to clients. That then led to the increases in inflation that we saw.
It is. And, no food company wants to increase prices overly quickly, right? Because increased price, there's a cost of living crisis. It does dampen demand for products, right? But if they're to maintain margin, if they maintain the team that they have, if they continue to invest in innovation, if they're going to maintain a financially sustainable business, I'm afraid they have to pass on those costs. And obviously consumers, especially in the food sector, they absolutely suffered on the back of those cost increases.
And in terms of energy increases, most of the businesses in those food sectors are energy intensive businesses. So what measures did they take to try and combat some of those increases that they faced?
Yeah, so there was a couple of key areas that companies really focused on, and cutting costs across the business was really, really important. Being ruthless on the cash tied up in stock was pretty vital, and then just making sure that you're really fit for purpose. One of the parts of the report that we have this year is about corporate recovery and looking at financial and non-financial red flags. So we just gave a range of areas that companies have to continue to look at, the level of sales, level of margin, whether your payments from customers are being delayed, what type of demands revenue are placing on you, and then non-financial red flags, are you losing customers? Is there indecision at senior management team level? Is there a strong staff and management turnover? Our owners, and we see this quite a bit, like where owners take a non-commercial salary, to support the business. So you just need to be really conscious about those financial and non-financial red flags, especially in light of those energy increases that we experienced for the last couple of years.
when it comes to staff costs, many sectors are feeling the pinch when it comes to this. And with a significant minimum wage increase mooted for next year, that can put even more pressure on employers. So how are the rising costs impacting recruitment trends in the industry? And what are clients doing in relation to trying to offset those? Are they looking, for instance, at bringing staff in from overseas?
They are. They're also looking, where possible, at automation and investing in automation. So where you can actually, focus your staff on, we call it higher value work, that is very attractive. And again, there are grants to support that automation journey, especially for food and agribusinesses, from Enterprise Ireland, from Leydon, from the local enterprise office. So automation is pretty critical. Even getting staff from overseas is challenging. Getting work permits is challenging. We have a payroll department there that work on those work permits, but that's not straightforward, and it takes time. So, there is a squeeze on staff, and automation is an important part of mitigation against that squeeze.
On the topic of automation, what about the growing prevalence of artificial intelligence and how that's being utilised by agri-food businesses?
Yeah, are not being utilised, as the case may be. We found that only 1 in 5 businesses was actively using AI. And we've all heard about AI for the last while. The farmers listening to the show will know a different AI, but the AI we're talking about here is the artificial intelligence, and it's the likes of ChatGPT, which is probably the best known sort of generative AI model that's out there. So we've given a couple of good examples in terms of how AI can be useful in marketing, in customer service, for developers and coders in your team, for translation. So we think when we ask this question this time next year, the numbers using AI will have increased dramatically.
And of course, innovation is the route to all sustainable, successful businesses. So how are the agri-food and food sectors prioritising this?
Yeah, well, in terms of innovation, look, at innovation can be anything from just a new product development or new service development through to automation, through to developing a completely new concept or new product. But in terms of the food companies, if we just focus on those for a minute, 53% view launching a new product or service as a major growth opportunity. And sort of the trends that the food companies are leaning into is they're still leaning into at-home dining. They're looking at premium desserts. They're looking at high-protein options for food service sector. So, people who eat on the run, who eat on the go in either morning, lunchtime, evening time. High protein is a really strong sales opportunity. They're looking at food waste reduction. You even see those now, the wonky veg boxes, for example. So anything around that area is some of the stuff that food companies are pursuing at the moment.
And in terms of expanding their reach, what percentage of companies were looking to export markets to achieve further growth?
Yeah, well, just close on 50% of them see export markets. And I might just focus on the agribusiness sector on that one, and the ag tech sector, because really we've seen incredible growth in the dairy sector since 2013. Actually, I was looking at some CSO figures, and there's been a 62% increase in the amount of liters produced by Irish dairy farmers in the last decade, right? But that growth has come to a fairly shuddering halt. So rapid egg dairy expansion is over. We've heard all about nitrates over the last couple of weeks. Milk price is struggling. So for agribusinesses and ag tech companies, it's now time to really look abroad, because the pie that will be available from primary agriculture is going to decline or stabilise at best and decline at worst. So export is absolutely critical. And we even have some case studies in there from the likes of Pearson Milk and Technology, who are exporting their dairy technology from a tie all over the world. But there's loads of examples of good Irish agribusinesses exporting. But that's it's critical now that you get on the plane, you go to the shows, you go to the events across the world, and you start selling Irish agri and ag tech products all over the world.
What other challenges were identified within the report, David?
Yeah, so just a couple of final quick ones there. You have interest rate increases as a problem. There's definitely a cohort of businesses that are finding that pressurised. There is cash flow challenges. 35% are experiencing short or medium-term cash flow challenges. There was a nugget there from Norrie Macy, who's our head of banking, and it's about ESG. And very much for SMEs now, banks will be looking at your ESG, which is your environmental, your social and governance reporting, when they make a decision and evaluate you as a potential borrower. So it's been talked about for many years, but it's going to start becoming very real for SMEs that they will need to start doing ESG reporting if they really want to, have a good relationship with their bank.
And on the topic of cash flow, of course, there was over 60,000 businesses that availed of the revenues tax warehousing scheme during the COVID pandemic. From your own clients' perspective, how are they now engaging with revenue in terms of agreeing repayment schedules, and how's all that going?
Yeah, it's challenging for some companies, especially those companies who depended on it and where underlying profitability was challenged since COVID sort of ended. So again, we have a corporate recovery section to the firm, and they're engaging with some of those clients that are in particular difficulty. And there are a number of options there, including SCARF for some of those where it gets really serious. So, but look, at revenue are focused on many of the companies that use the debt warehousing, which was very badly needed at the time. But if the underlying profitability hasn't improved, that's becoming a serious situation.
And David, finally, what is the outlook for the food and agri-business sectors over the next 12 months?
Yeah, so if we can see input cost increases coming to an end, and if the economy continues in a fairly decent way, food and agribusinesses should be okay for the next while. But again, they need to focus on exporting, especially the ag tech and the food tech businesses. They need to continue to invest in innovation. They need to manage their cash flows tightly. They need to be ruthless on cost control. So every individual business needs to really be sharp on managing their own business.
Well, if you've just tuned in, that was David Leydon, the Head of Food and Agribusiness with ifac, and I'd like to thank David for sharing the report findings with us on this morning's show.
Southeast Radio's Business Matters with Karl Fitzpatrick.